tonight the theme is psychology and beyond. Now I'm very, very interested in the idea of the way psychology is spreading and being used in the world in every walk of life. I'd like to just start by reading. It's in a book I wrote called Mind Power, and it's in the introduction. And it says, until we put men on the moon, we rather thought of the universe as just a physical universe in which things were done by mathematics, somehow physics, mathematics, and somehow we got men on the moon. But once we'd done that, it started to come home to us that someone had to think up first the idea of going to the moon, to initiate the machinery, to work out the mathematics, and to actually put the whole thing into operation. And that it couldn't have been done without man himself. And it couldn't have been done without mind. So that brought mind into focus. And we began to connect the two. Now, it wasn't so long ago that philosophy was the only way in which we all dwelt on the large issues of life. What is life? What is it all about? And it's been going on for thousands of years, considering it, splitting hairs over it. Each philosopher coming up with different variations as to what life might be or might not be, whether there was God or not God, and how this God, if there was a God, worked. But not until a man called Mesmer, I'm sure you've all heard of Mesmer because of mesmerism, which was the forerunner of hypnosis. When Mesmer went on a tour, he went to America actually, on a tour, where, this is a digression actually, but a man called Phineas P. Quimby, who was one of the founders of religious science, our form of thinking, went to hear him, where he got his inspiration that the mind could be suggested to, and when his horses bolted, when he was dying and his horses bolted and he found that he'd brought them home safely, somehow, he didn't know how, he began to think in terms of the mind working quite independently, that it had its own power and its own force, and that led him to go back to using the healing techniques of Jesus. This was in Maine in the early part of the century, and one of his students became Mary Baker Eddy, who started Christian Science. That is a digression. But Mesmer brought the power of suggestion into focus, that the mind could be suggested to. After which came Freud, who recognized that there was an unconscious, later we called it subconscious, an unconscious aspect to mind. And then from that point on, there was a movement towards what later came to be called psychology. Now, because World War I, this is what I discovered in my research when I was doing this book, because of the opportunity to work on many, many thousands of cases of shell shock and all kinds of things that men did in war that couldn't be explained at all, that obviously were mental reactions, we had a chance to do a great deal of experimentation and came up with the idea of psychosomatic association, the mind and medicine. That began with doctors of the mind, which led on into the whole study of psychosomatics, which is the bringing together of medicine and mind. Now, after which, there was an enormous period of resistance. People didn't like the idea of a psychology of behavior. And that resistance lasted for a very long time. But let me just point out that today, the language has picked up so much of psychology that we hardly realize where it came into our lives, how it filtered into our consciousness, with words like complex, he's got a complex, or it's all psychological, it's his nerves, or nervous breakdown. Whoever questions the fact that people have nervous breakdowns anymore? And we use words like schizophrenic with the greatest of ease. Everyone knows roughly that means a split personality, someone whose mind has become split in its understanding, or its hold or its control on so-called reality. So then that was the beginning of psychology. That was the way it infiltrated until it just has become really part of life. I don't suppose there's anyone you ever speak to in our Western culture who doesn't know exactly what psychology is. Now, what is psychology? It's really the study of human behavior. It's human nature. It has set about making a science of understanding why we behave the way we do, what we're likely to do under certain circumstances, what we're likely to do under all circumstances if possible, and to learn to get at the root causes of our troubles and to find ways to cope and to act and resolve these difficulties. Now the result has blossomed and spread to the point where we have got every kind of psychology now. We've got ordinary psychology, which breaks into innumerable branches. Humanistic psychology, transpersonal psychology, Gestalt, to name but a few. We've got psychotherapy of all descriptions. We've got psychiatry, which is the combination of medicine and psychology. We've got psychoanalysis, which doesn't have to be medical, but as opposed to psychiatry, but you then look back into your childhood as far back as you can go and study your dreams to try and understand what you've suppressed and repressed and has gone into what we could call the basement of our lives. The basement where things are hidden, suppressed, and put out of our knowledgeable sight, thereby causing all kinds of symptoms and results that we can't explain, but which affect our daily lives, affect everything that we do. And we've got all kinds of splinter branches of behavioral psychology, clinical psychology, theoretical psychology. We've got branches of it like encounter groups, where you all come together in groups and speak out your problems, and share the difficulties and try to arrive at things together. Or you've got psychodrama, where you act out your problems. Or rebirthing, where you go back and are born again and become a child and go through all the motions of being born. Or you've got the primal scream. I'm reminded of very amusing thing that when my daughter, or I ought not to mention my daughter because I mentioned her in a lecture and forgot, and she got the tape and she said, "That was not fair, Mum." However, when she was getting a divorce, the previous wife rang her up and said, "You must join my primal scream group," which I thought was a riot myself. I mean, this was the answer to all this chap's wives. To her, a very practical suggestion. She'd been in psychiatry for many years, and she discovered the primal scream. And that, what you do there is you just scream your head off to get rid of the anger that you've bottled up. And you can kick if you want to, and say anything you feel like saying. And so in all of these, there's a kind of common aim, which is to bring up into consciousness what you've buried and confront it, look at it, go over it, come to terms with it, and work it through. Now, I can't speak too highly of psychology, and I don't want anyone to think here that I'm going to belittle it in any way, because we use psychology heavily in science of mind. It is a great part of our teaching, and it is essential. I'm thinking of a wonderful dream I had once, and this is true, I'm not making this up, although I'm probably elaborating a bit. And I dreamed I got into a lift, and the lift said, all human difficulties this way. And I got into the lift, and it started up. Now, there were all different floors you could get off at. And each one was slightly more profound. But they were all human level. Yet these were human level floors, and you could get off at any one you wanted. You could get off at psychoanalysis of dreams, or the search for a more peaceful form of life, greater prosperity. I mean, you could name all these different floors. Then suddenly they came to an end. And it said, all change here. Wasn't that wonderful? I mean, it was so graphic. All change here. So then I thought, well, what do I do now? Because it was the end and you had to get off. But what it turned out to have was all kinds of corridors. And you could go along these corridors, and there were lifts that went even higher. Now, you could decide whether or not you wanted to go higher. And in this dream, as it got higher, it got the whole solidity of the lifts fell away. They'd been strong, normal metal boxes, the way lifts are. Now they became very rickety. And one went up terribly high in these rickety things. And there was just space all round and brilliant blue above. And a feeling of totally insecure and helpless and without anybody that could help you any further. And then I realized that this was an ascent to the spiritual dimension. And you could take that, or you could turn back and go in a lift back down if you wanted to the human level. Now, I think that this is what happens, that psychology is a marvelous, wonderful way to become aware of what's wrong, to find means and ends, to cope. And the word cope is the key one. And then, someday, you come to this where the lift doesn't go any farther or any further. is what psychology is. It deals only with the human level of life, only with behavioral illustrations of what we are. It doesn't go any farther. Now, there are people, I would say the majority, in the Western world, who will use any form of psychology available, but they will not go into spirit. Now, this is what happens. They say, don't talk to me about anything spiritual. Now, you're going to have 9 out of 10 people say this. Don't talk to me about, all of this is all very well and good. I like what you say. I go along with what you say. But when it comes to God and spirit, no thank you. Now, I had a lot of, I got thinking about this because it happens so often, and thought to myself, why is there this resistance? Why are the masses of people resistant to the spiritual? Now, here again, it's extremely logical that we had a far too vigorous a dose of the orthodox theology for too many years. People broke away and are still breaking away. They're breaking away not because they've turned against anything, but because theology was in a way put upon them, imposed upon them. They inherited it. They didn't have a time to really think about it. The other day I was getting dressed and the church bells from the local church began to ring. They seemed to have lost the art of rope pulling or something, but it was the most dismal dirge you ever heard. And it was just flat, and it went on, and it went on for an hour and a half. And I thought, can you imagine if we, in Science of Mind, suddenly went somewhere and started ringing a bell for an hour and a half? What would happen to us? We have no right to ring a bell. We're not in the Anglican Church. We're not in the Catholic Church. We're not in an Orthodox religion. They have a right. Where's the right come from? We have given the Church the power, the rule. It is always allowed to have a say in everything. It has its right. Now, can we say it is a God-given right any more than ours is? I don't think so. But if we went out there and started ringing bells like that, we would be considered nuts and freaks, and probably the police would come along and see that we were locked up. Right. So I think there was a backlash of people who had God rammed down their throats in the theological sense for just too long. And now, although they didn't know what they wanted in its place, they did not want to be given more religion. So the word religion lost favor. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't coming back, because it is. And in America, you know, we're called religious science. And we have churches. In this country, it's more difficult to do that, for reasons just stated. But this, I think, has brought about the people who will go to psychologists, will empty out the contents of their minds and hearts. They'll go to any form of psychology, but they won't allow you to speak about spirit and God. Now, in our form of counseling, this is where it also came even clearer to me. When we counsel, we are psychologists up to a point. At least I know that I am. And I listen from the point of view of psychology to arrive at the root cause of the difficulty. We, in practitioners' class, study psychosomatics and the whole origin of childhood difficulties and all the categories they fall into and so forth. But this is where we differ. When we've found the root cause, when we've worked it out, what do we do next? We treat for it. We do spiritual treatment. And that is where it all becomes totally different. Because we then move in on doing something immediately spiritual about it. Now, my thesis, my premise is that all forms of psychology come to a limit, come to a boundary line where they are ultimately insufficient. They do not have the ultimate solutions to things. They have a great deal of help, a tremendous amount of support. A lot of liberation comes from recognition, from identifying with the problem, and so forth. But when you come out of psychology, and this has come to my attention so much, you still don't really have the big answers. You don't still know who you are in relation to the universe. You don't know why life is there, why you are put. Why is life like it is? And then, if you don't go that step farther into the spiritual dimension for your answers, you're stuck. And very many people find that the answers they've got in psychology fall away from them under stress. When things go very wrong, when grief hits, when the unexpected comes, they find they had the answers in a temporary sense and up to a degree, but they haven't got the big answers. And my contention is that you must take that next step if you want the real answers in life. In spirit we find all the answers, and all the answers to everything. Every human problem can be answered in the realm of spirit. So this is the essential, unavoidable, inescapable next step. And those of us who've taken it, who've come into a teaching like Science of Mind, have moved on into a dimension where all answers are available. We can now turn into ourselves where God is. We can begin to listen. We can make ourselves known in a personal way and know that spirit acts as law. We believe that spirit acts as law, and that the law of the subconscious mind is spirit in action. This is about as clear a statement as I think can be made of what we are about. Spirit always acts through and by means of law. Reliable, inexorable law. It never is arbitrary. It never acts outside itself, because there is no outside to itself. It always acts by means of its own law. Therefore, by understanding ourselves as spiritual beings, we then can apply the law to our own lives, which works for us by corresponding. We can consciously and deliberately process our lives, create our lives, direct our lives as we want them to go, by recognition of who and what we are, by putting into the law of our subconscious mind, which is the creative medium of life and of being, and law has no choice but to respond. Therefore, we at a spiritual level stop being the seeking, looking out there, searching for answers. We become our own directors of our own lives, our own experience, our own destiny. We take charge from a spiritual approach. We take charge and become the authority in our own lives. This then doesn't preclude psychology, it includes it and goes into an all-embracing wholeness. Emerson said, "When the half-gods go, God arrives." And I think that all solutions at the human level, at the psychological level, are steps, helpful steps, but ultimately they are half-gods. And the final dimension is God Himself, itself, within us, as us, providing all the ultimate answers. Right, so if now you would relax again, only this time much more so, with your eyes closed, hands loosely on your thighs, straight backs so that you don't fall asleep, and a lovely, deep and peaceful feeling starting in your feet, which are firmly on the ground, and moving your hips, which are relaxed and heavy on the seat. This is all in lieu of the lotus position. This is our sort of westernized version. Now we move the relaxed feeling upward into the torso, into the arms, lovely, relaxed arms, while we breathe gently and easily, relaxing, relaxing. Relaxed hands and fingers, no tension in the hands or fingers. Upward to the shoulders, all tension, stress, bracing up, tight muscles, relaxed, completely relaxed. Upward into the back of the neck and into the face, all lines smoothed away across the forehead, around the eyes, around the mouth. The eyes themselves soft, relaxed, peaceful, breathing gently. Throat is relaxed, jaw muscles relaxed, tongue relaxed, and mouth. Breathing easily, gently, we are relaxed. Now we do this because as we relax every muscle, every point of tension, the body loses its tight, confined grip on our senses. And we can realize much more easily that we are more than the body we live in, use, and make our daily object of movement. We realize we extend beyond the body, that the mind is in the body but not contained in it. The mind is also outside the body looking at it. For we are essentially spiritual beings in a spiritual universe which extends ad infinitum and which is complete in itself and perfect and whole and without opposites, self-loving, self-creating, self-realizing. And that as we come into consciousness with our spiritual selves, all the power that is invisible becomes ours to use at our individual level. The absolute becomes the transient within us. As we turn to it, it turns to us. Therefore we can come with all of the problems ever known, felt or thought about, and they are already understood, and the answers are already supplied. As we turn for the answers and listen, the answers are given us, and they are the right answers, the final answers, the good answers. They are based in truth of ultimate nature. They are based in love, the Spirit giving of itself to its own. So let us use psychology in all its various forms to meet our human needs, but let us not forget to turn within to Spirit, to God, the Creator itself, for all that is ultimate, all that is finally true, and has all the ultimate power.